Good morning, everybody. Special greetings to grade 12 teachers, my colleagues, subject advisors, and special greetings to grade 12 learners. Let me take this moment to greet you all and say it's been a long time, but here we are, and it's actually almost the end of the year. My name is Mr. Medupi Mui from Head Office, Free State Department of Education, and my position there is the Provincial Subject Coordinator for Business Studies in the province. Today, we are going to focus on the memo discussion of Business Studies Paper 1 that was written yesterday. And I wish to extend good lucks to all of you grade 12 learners. I know it hasn't been easy this year, and when you look at 2021, you realize that basically you just wrote the June examination, and because that June examination was actually not compulsory, so there may be schools that did not sit for June examination, so the grade 12 trial examination was actually the actual examination that you formally wrote this year. So I'm going to take you through the do's and the don'ts of how to go about marking and what is it that is expected of you in as far as the marking of this paper is concerned. Without any waste of time, I'm going to take you, now I'm referring to the teachers now, because they're the ones that are going to sit down and go through your scripts and mark your scripts. I'm going to take you through what we normally refer to as notes to markers. These notes are very, very important, grade 12 teachers. And I know there may be teachers who are teaching grade 12 for the first time, so it's important to take you through the marking, the notes to markers. Of course, I'm not going to go through all the notes, but I will just focus on few that are of importance. But as a marker, as a teacher, it's your responsibility to go through all the notes so that when you start marking, you know exactly how you should go about marking, and you are also able to share this with your learners in class. Note number 1 there, it's about people who take part in the moderation, in the marking and moderation of the scripts. For example, at school level, the teachers, you are expected to make use of a red pen when you mark, and there at school level, you also have got departmental heads, the HODs. You are expected to make use of a green pen when you moderate scripts that would have been marked by the teachers, and then you will have outsiders like your subject advisors or even moderators from either province or even DBE. They will use different colors of pens when they come to moderate, but moderation, it takes place throughout, at school level, at district, at province, even at national. And then it is important to note that learners' responses must be in full sentences for section B and C. However, this will depend on the nature of the question. We encourage that learners should, by all means, present their responses in full sentences so that they don't end up losing marks unnecessarily, because you know by now in business studies, when it comes to split marking, we look at where the facts are, and if learners' responses are not in full sentences, instead of benefiting and being awarded 2 marks, they end up getting 1 mark instead of 2 marks. So responses in full sentences, especially in section B and C, are highly encouraged and very, very important, but it depends on the nature of the question. Number 3, a comprehensive memo has been provided, but this is by no means exhaustive. Due consideration should be given to to an answer that is correct but uses a different expression, that which appears in the marking guideline or come from another source, or it's correct and original, or relates to other applicable topics. So it is important that as a marker, when you mark, you also have an open mind to read and interpret responses of your learners correctly, and not necessarily, stick to the memo word by word. You must also be in a position to accommodate responses that are correct and original, or they've been presented in a different way, but they are still correct. And it's important to note that in section A, there is no alternative answer. So section A, there is no one or two answers. It's only one answer that is correct. So there is no alternative answers in section A. Please take due note of other relevant answers provided by learners and allocate marks accordingly. In cases where the answer is unclear or indicates some understanding, part marking should be awarded. For example, 1 mark instead of the maximum of 2 marks. Even here, it's important. You read the response of the learner. If it is unclear, but it is still within the context of what is being asked, you'd rather allocate 1 mark instead of 2 marks. But it is important that you read and interpret responses of learners accordingly. And then the word submax is used to facilitate the allocation of marks within a question or sub-questions. It's important when you start marking, you look at the question, you look at the marking guideline, because some questions in the marking guideline have got sub-max, others have got max. Sub-max, if you do not pay attention to sub-max and maxes in the memo, you end up marking and not marking accurately. So every now and then you need to go to the memo to check whether here there is a sub-max, here there is a max, and what is the max, and so on. We'll venture into all of those when you go deeper into the marking guideline. This is just to sensitize you in as far as the note is concerned, note number 5. And then number 6, the purpose of circling marks is important on the right-hand side, and is to ensure consistency and accuracy in marking of scripts, as well as for calculation of purposes. All marks must be circled and be put on the right-hand side. And then subtotals to questions must be written on the right-hand margin. Circle the subtotals and indicate by the allocation of marks. This must be guided by max in the memo. Only the total for each question should appear in the left-hand margin next to the appropriate question. Note number 8, correct numbering of answers to questions or sub-questions is recommended in section A and B. It is important to also sensitize your learners that they should use the numbering system that has been used in the question paper. Otherwise, they get penalized, but strict adherence to this has not actually been fully implemented. But your learners are encouraged to use the numbering system. Otherwise, they will be penalized. And here I'm referring now to the end of the year. So you start preparing them for the end of the year. Note number 8 is very, very important. Number 9, repetition. No additional credit must be given for repetition of facts, and indicate that with an R. And then differentiation between evaluate and critical evaluate can be explained as follows. This note has been there for some time now, but it's just to draw a line between these two verbs, and we are not using critically evaluate at the moment, but it is there in the memos because later on, because our subject is evolving and there are changes that come year in, year out. Who knows, this may be brought back. So it does not mean because it's not used in the paper, we should not take note of it. 10.1, when evaluate is used, candidates are expected to respond in either a positive or negative manner, or take a neutral or positive and negative stance. E.g., quieter eliminates time and cost spent, it's 1 mark. On lengthy civil court proceeding, it's another mark. This is the positive response to this question. And it is in an instance where evaluate has been used. Now, when critically evaluate is used, candidates are expected to respond in either a positive or negative manner, or take a neutral stance. In this instance, candidates are also expected to support their responses with more depth. For example, quieter eliminates time and cost spent, it's 1 mark. On lengthy civil court proceeding, it's another mark. Now, here comes a further explanation. Because the employer will not be liable for compensation to the employee for injuries sustained during working hours, as long as it can be proved that the business was not negligent, another mark. So you can see there that there is depth in 10.2, and that's why an additional mark is being allocated there. So this is just to draw a line between the two verbs there, and to sensitize you that this may come back later, but at the moment you won't find critical evaluate in our question paper. And then the above could also be applied to either analyze and note the placing of the tick in the allocation of marks. And then number 11, very, very important. The allocation of marks must be informed by the nature of the question, cognitive verbs used, mark allocation in the marking guideline, and the context of each question. Now, this note 11.1 and 11.2, very, very important, because they guide as to how you should go about marking, and that will also be realized in the marking guideline. For example, cognitive verbs such as advise, name, state, outline, motivate, recommend, suggest, and so on do not require much depth in learners' responses. Therefore, the mark allocation for each statement or answer appears at the end. This is where you put 2 ticks or 1 tick at the end of the response, because there isn't much depth that is expected from the learner's responses. However, when it comes to the following verbs, define, describe, explain, discuss, elaborate, compare, distinguish, differentiate, tabulate, devise, analyze, evaluate, and so on. All these, they require a greater depth of understanding and application and reasoning. Therefore, the marks must be allocated more objectively. To ensure that marks must be allocated, marks are allocated more objectively to ensure that assessing is conducted according to established norms, so that uniformity, consistency, and fairness are achieved. Here on 11.2, that's where you now experience split marking, because now you allocate mark objectively and you go straight to where the fact is. Number 12, mark only the first answer where learners offers more than 1 answer for section B and section C that require an answer. So this note also has always been there. It's just for you to, to implement, and please implement the notes so that your learners don't get surprised at the end of the year, because at the end of the year, an adherence to the notes is not negotiable. And then section B, this note has also been there. If, for example, 5 facts are required, mark the learner's first 5 responses and ignore the rest of the responses. Indicate by drawing a line across the unmarked portion. This applies only to questions where the number of facts is specified. The above also applies to responses in section C where applicable. And then if 2 facts are written in 1 sentence, award full marks. If learners are required to provide their own examples, this can, you can brainstorm, you can, if you are sitting there at school and you are not sure of certain things, you've got colleagues in your clusters, you've got your subject advisors, there's always somebody out there that you can get the second opinion of before you can, finally say this is what has got to happen. And then the use of cognitive verbs and allocation of marks. If the number of facts are specified, questions that require learners to describe, discuss, explain may be marked as follows. 2 marks as indicated in the marking guideline, and then for a fact, and then 1 mark for the explanation. And it is important to note that only when the number of facts are specified. For example, if a question says describe 2, or if it says discuss 2 advantages of, let's take for example, in the case of paper 2, topic advantages of sole trader. I'm just making an example. So because the number has been specified, where you'll have an heading and also an explanation, and that would, the marking guideline will also support that and will also clearly indicate that. Here is just for you to take note that this note is there and it should be applicable, but it's only when number of facts have been specified and those verbs are used in the questions. Describe, discuss, and explain. The fact and explanation are given separately in the marking guideline to facilitate mark allocation. It also depends on the nature of the question and the context of that question. 13.4.2, if number of facts required is not specified, the allocation of marks must be informed by the nature of the question and the maximum marks allocated in the marking guideline. Section C, you know by now in section C that our essays, the total mark is 40, but how do we arrive at 40? Your introduction, content, and conclusion, the total should be to a maximum of 32. Then you add 8 marks for insight. That's how you arrive at the total for 40. And then let's come to marks for insight. The layout, for example, or the structure is 2 marks, and we look at whether the learner in answering an essay, the essay has got introduction and it has got body and then conclusion. And for introduction, we allocate 1 mark on the left-hand side, and conclusion, another mark on the left-hand side. That's what gives you 2 marks. But this introduction is a heading. The learner should literally write introduction, and then write the introduction underneath, and then conclusion underneath, and then the learner will qualify or will get the 2 marks. And then analysis and interpretation. Is the learner's ability to break the question into headings, interpret it correctly to show understanding of what is being asked. For example, here it's analysis and interpretation. It's 2 marks also. How do you allocate the 2 marks? The first 1 mark is if the learner has addressed all the headings. Headings we are referring to in an essay, you've got 4 bullets. Each bullet is an instruction. If the learner has adhered to all the instructions or has answered all the questions, all the bullets, the learner will get 1 mark. And then if when you add the marks of the learner, they are 16 and above, the learner will get the 2nd mark, and that will be 2 marks for analysis and interpretation. And then synthesis, it's all about relevancy. And here we are using negative marking. For example, we presume that whatever the learner has discussed is relevant. And if that is the case, that learner will get 2 marks. But every time the learner brings anything irrelevant, then we say minus S. So you will see that no relevant facts. If in an essay, everything that the learner has put there is not relevant, it's irrelevant, you will have 2 minus S's. If the learner has some facts relevant and some irrelevant, you'll have 1 minus S. And then if you have 1 minus S, it means the learner will get 1 for synthesis. And then if the learner has got only relevant facts, the learner will get 2 marks, and there won't be any minus S on the essay. So if there is no indication of minus S on the learner script, it means that learner will get 2 marks. And then you've got the options, option 1, 2, 3. And later on we'll learn of option 4. Option 1, where learners answers 50% or more of the question with only relevant facts. No minus S appears in the relevant margin, and award a maximum of 2 marks for the synthesis. Now here, you must be careful. With option 1, we are saying where a learner answers 50% or more. What is 50%? When you look at the essay has got 4 bullets, meaning it has got 4 instructions or 4 questions. Now, those 4 instructions, if a learner in the essay addresses 2 and more, that learner, and if whatever the learner has discussed is relevant, the learner will get full 2 marks for synthesis, because the learner has addressed at least 50%, because it's 4 the learner has talked about, 2 has addressed 2. Option 2, where a learner answers less than 50. For example, you've got 4 bullets, but the learner talked about only 1. It's less than 50. That learner will get 1 for synthesis, because the learner did not address all, the 50% and more of what has been asked. Or only some relevant facts. Now, sometimes a learner brings irrelevant facts into the essay. If there is irrelevant facts, there will be 1 minus S. And here we are referring to a paragraph, not like a statement, which is irrelevant, but a paragraph, or a subheading that is irrelevant. And you write that in the left-hand margin minus S, and you award only maximum of 1 mark, because there is some of the facts are relevant, some are irrelevant. The learner will get only 1 minus S and will qualify for 1 mark for synthesis. And then option 3, where learner answers less than 50 of the questions with no relevant facts. 2 minus S appear in the left-hand margin and award 0 marks for synthesis. It means here the learner answers less than 50%, and even whatever the learner has answered, it's also irrelevant. That learner will get 0 for synthesis, because it will be 2 minus S's. I hope this has also clarified what synthesis is all about. And then originality, we are looking for relevant and current examples that are linked to what has been asked. Not just examples that are relevant to what has been asked, relevant to the questions. And we are not talking about here examples from the textbook, because when you look at your marks for insight, it's easy for learners to get 2 marks for layout. It's easy for analysis and interpretation. It's even more easier for synthesis. But originality, it should take that extraordinary child to get that 2 marks for originality, because here you are talking about a learner who is also following what is happening currently even in the news, and bring that to class. Link that with what has been asked in the essay. And then that's 8 marks. And then please note that no marks will be awarded for contents repeated from the introduction and conclusion. For example, in an essay, if, let me just take an example of an essay and clearly show you what I'm actually talking about. For example, let's take a look at question 5. That information in the box, it says the National Credit Act was introduced to protect consumers against reckless credit granting by businesses. The Act outlines several fundamental rights of consumers in the credit market, and businesses should be acting according to a set of rules. Now, if a learner takes those two statements and write them as introduction, you don't award the 2 marks in the introduction because that was given to the learner. So you simply refer to that as repetition. It's repetition and you don't award marks. Even if the learner can take the very same information and use it in the conclusion, that will not be awarded marks. Rather, it will be considered as repetition. So be careful when you come to that. All right? And then no marks, okay, we've talked about that. And then the learner forfeits marks for layout if the words introduction and conclusion are not stated. It is important to note that the learner must literally state, write the word introduction or conclusion. And then no marks will be awarded for layout if the headings introduction and are not supported by an explanation underneath. I hope that is clear when it comes to the essay. And then indicate the insight in the left-hand margin with a symbol L, A, S, or O. What does this mean? It means it's important that when you mark an essay, marks that you have awarded to a learner in the essay, you indicate that for insight, you indicate them on the left-hand margin. You cannot have a situation where you've awarded marks when it comes to insight, but you did not indicate where you have allocated those marks. So it's important on the left-hand margin. And then the breakdown of marks is indicated at the end of the suggested answer. And then mark all relevant facts until the submax. Mark in a subsection has been attained. You must write submax or max after maximum marks have been obtained, but continue reading for originality. It's also important to read also for originality. And then at the end of each essay, down there, when you mark, you must have these words: F for facts, and then L for layout, A for analysis and interpretation, S for synthesis, and O for originality. You add, remember for facts, you cannot have more than 32 marks. 32 is the maximum. I think I have touched on basically what I deem very important, the notes that I think they are very, very important for you as the marker to take note of. You can read other notes before you start marking and continue with that. I now want us to go straight to the question paper. When you look at section A, I've already talked about section A, that all responses, there is no second response to any question, or there is no question that has got two correct answers. So it's, for example, 1.1.1, if the learner did not write D as the correct answer, that learner is wrong. And the learner cannot write D or A, not at all. So there are no alternative answers to that, and it's 10 marks for 1.1, 10 marks for 1.2, 10 marks for 1.3, and then section A, total is 30 marks. We can now go straight to section B. Let's go straight to section B. And then when you look at section B, learners were expected to answer any two questions in this section. Question 2, it was based on business environments. 2.1. Name any 3 provisions of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. That was straightforward question. Number 2, identify the POTA's 5 forces elements applied by YACO manufacturers in each statement. Now, when you look at that, it's basically application. It has got an element of application. Now, it's about time that your learners now apply the knowledge that they have gathered, because questions such as these are the ones that you must begin to use even in your informal assessment, because here is application. Can they interpret and can they apply the knowledge that they have? For example, 2.2.1, YACO manufacturers drew up Tiro manufacturers' profile to determine their own strength as well as that of Tiro manufacturers. That's the first statement. The second one, they conducted market research to gather more information about their customers. Number 3, YACO manufacturers is highly profitable and attracts many new entrepreneurs to enter this market. It's 6 marks. Now, when you look at all of those statements, they are all about POTA's 5 forces. Now, let's look at what was expected of the responses. We are on 2.2. The first response, it relates to competitive rivalry or power of competitors. The second one is power of buyer or buyer power. The third one is threat of new entrants to the market. And now, you must also be careful when you mark your learners, because these are the forces. Learners cannot take shortcuts. For example, learners cannot simply write competition. If a learner simply wrote competition, that is wrong. It should be power of competitors or competitive rivalry. The second one there, the learner can't just write buyers or simply customers or whatever. It has got to be power of buyer or buyer power. And then the third one, threat of new entrants to the market. It has got to be clear there. It has got to, the word threat is very, very key. Threat of new entrants to the market. So when you mark this, you must really be careful and be strict when marking this, because these are the forces and they are there. And your learners cannot come up with shortcuts when it comes to answering this question. And of course, 2.3, a question that has been repeated for some time now. 3 steps in strategy evaluation. When you evaluate a strategy, and we've talked about this, and I believe that your teachers, now I'm referring to learners, have also sensitized you. And even new teachers, I believe you now have got amendments to the notes. It's important because when you look at, old memos, the responses, they're different from what you have now. And it's important to take into account the amendments to the notes and the responses that we are looking for now going forward. For example, those steps, it is important. They may be in any order, but it is important that the key word there is evaluation. How do you evaluate, make an evaluation? Evaluation of strategies. The business should examine the underlying basis of a strategy. Examine is key word there. And look forward and backwards into the implementation process. Compare the expected results in order to determine the reasons for the deviations and analyze these reasons. Take corrective action so that deviations may be corrected. Set specific dates for control and follow-up. Draw up a table of the advantages and disadvantages of a strategy. Decide on the desired outcome and consider the impact of strategic implementation in the internal and external environment of the business. So you can hear all the steps have got to do with evaluation. You cannot come up here with SWOT analysis and so on. So look at this, and it's been there for some time. I think even in the June exam, this question was there. So be careful when you mark this question, and the note there, mark the first three, because the question said outline any three steps in strategy evaluation. So you mark the first three responses only. And then I want to take you to another question. Another question. When you look at this question, question 2.4, a very common kind of a question, and we expect learners now to be knowing this question by now. We expect learners now to be clever, to answer this question as expected, and to get the marks accordingly. For example, let's read this scenario. It's about Verona's Manufacturers. Verona Manufacturers is a manufacturing business situated in Gr12. Some of their workers leave the workplace before knock-off time. Gr12 suppliers increased their prices by 10%. VM had to close their businesses for 3 days due to COVID-19 pandemic. That is a scenario. Look at the questions. 2.4.1. Quote 3 challenges for VM from the scenario above. 3 challenges. They quote 3 challenges. And then 2.4.2. Classify the challenges according to 3 business environments. And then the last question there, state the extent of control that VM has over each business environment, named in question 2.4.2. So you see, here it's 9 marks. And if you have done justice and you have given your learners tips as to how to answer this question, I mean, 9 marks, can actually add a lot in as far as the pass mark of a learner is concerned. So it's an easy question, but can be tricky. Let's look how it should be marked. Now, look at this question, at the responses now. Challenges of the business sectors and the extent of control. 2.4.1. Look at the challenges there. Some of the workers leave the workplace before knock-off time. It's 1 mark. It's a challenge. It's been quoted verbatim as it is. It's 1 mark. Another challenge, Gr12 suppliers increased their prices with 10%. It's a challenge. And then VM had to close their businesses for 3 days due to COVID-19 pandemic. It's another challenge. It's 1 mark each. And there comes the submaxes. Can you see? There you have a submax of 3. And then question 2 said to you, you must classify challenges according to the business environment. Now, let's look at the first challenge. Some of their workers leave the workplace before knock-off time. Where does this fall? It falls under the micro environment. It means the business can deal with this. And what is the extent of control? The business has full control over this, because if people, leave and knock off earlier, it's a micro challenge. The business can deal with that. The business can correct that behavior. Number 2, Gr12 suppliers increase their prices with 10%. And this falls where? It falls under the market environment, because Gr12 suppliers falls under the market environment, and the business has partial or some control. The business does not have full control of that. And the last challenge, it's about the pandemic. It falls where? Under macro. Does the business have control over COVID? No. So the extent of control there it's no control, and it's also submax of 3. So when you add 3 plus 3 plus 3, it gives you 9 marks. So it's important that learners get full marks when it comes to this question, because it's one of the common questions, but learners, most of the time, they don't do well in this question. Now, look at the notes. Number 1, it says, do not award marks for the business environment if it was not linked with the challenge. What does that mean? If the learner simply wrote microenvironment but did not link that with the challenge, you can't award marks. Number 2, award full marks for the business environment, even if the challenge is not quoted in full. Now, for example, the learner there, instead of saying some of the workers leave the workplace before knock-off time, it's a full quotation, but the learner, if the learner has got the essence, did not quote in full, for example, the learner may say some workers leave the workplace. Did not quote in full, but what is important is that the workers, they leave the workplace. You award full marks for the business environment, even if the challenge is not quoted in full, because the challenge is there, but it was not quoted in full. And then the extent of control must be linked to the business environment. For example, the learner cannot write macro and then on the extent of control write full control. The learner has written macro, but on the extent of control it's macro. So the two, business environment and extent of control, they must also link. The extent of control must be linked with the business environment, because we know micro, the business has full control. If the learner says micro but no control, then the learner cannot get that right. So when you mark that, must be careful, and then accept responses in any order. What does that mean? The learner may start with the second response. For example, she writes supplies increased their prices by 10% as the first challenge. If you get what I mean, you still mark that right, and you also check whether the challenge is linked to the environment, and again the environment is linked to the extent of control. That is very, very important. And then we can go to other questions. When we go to other questions, you can see there that question 5, advantages of diversification strategies. It's a question that has been there. There is no problem about that question. And of course, explain how SETAs are funded. It's there also. And 2.7, advise businesses on the impact of Employment Equity Act on their operations. Now, the key word, the advise. Remember we talked about the verbs that have been used in a question and how the marking should be done thereof. Let's look at 2.7, for example. Uh, 2.7, the impact. You see, you've got 2 marks at the end of the response. The impact there, you've got positives and negatives, because the word there is impact. Advise the business on the impact of EEA on business. Positives, for example, promotes equal opportunity and fair treatment in the workplace is 2 marks. Promotes the implementation of affirmative action to redress the imbalances of employment, 2 marks. Provides all employees with an equal opportunity to be selected, appointed, promoted in a position, 2 marks. You can go through the other responses, but what is important here, because the question simply said the impact, and we know with impact we've got positives or negatives. Some learners may decide to focus only on the positives, award full marks, 6 marks if the learner has focused only on the positives. And again, you see, if the learner has also focused only on the negatives, for example, increased administration burden as business must compile, submit employment equity reports every 2 years, 2 marks. So if a learner has focused only on the negatives or disadvantages, you can also award full 6 marks. Again, it says and or. Now, if a learner has also mixed them up, supplied some positives and some negatives, but remember, to a maximum of 6 marks. That question is not actually difficult to mark, but you have to really focus on that. And that brings me to the end of question 2. And there is breakdown of marks. The total for question 2 is 40 marks. Let's go straight to question 3. Look at question 3. The first question is always, we call it an appetizer. A straightforward kind of a question. Look at 3.1. It says, state any 3 examples of fringe benefits in the business. Straight kind of a question, and it's just 1 mark each. And then number 2, outline the differences between piecemeal and time-related salary determination. A very common kind of a question, and I've got no doubt that your learners must have taken advantage of this, and if you have done justice, they are definitely going to get full marks for that. Let's look at how that question should be marked. 3.2, the difference between piecemeal and time-related salary determinations. Look at that. Piecemeal, for example, workers are paid according to the number of items or units produced or action performed, 2 marks. Time-related, on the other side, workers are paid for the number of time or hours they spent at work or on a task. It's another 2 marks. So you can see the difference between the two. You can read through all the responses. Let's come to the notes. You can see there that for piecemeal, submax is 2. For time-related, submax is 2. Maximum is 4. Now, look at the notes. The answer does not have to be in a tabular format. So, learners can present their responses in whatever way. But when you teach your learners, it's recommended that you advise them that use a table, because a table makes it easier, and a table simplifies even work for the marker. It becomes easier. But it does not mean if the responses are not put in a tabular format, learners will not be awarded marks accordingly. So that's what that note is all about. And then the differences does not have to link, but must be clear. So remember, when you talk of the differences, what does that mean? It means the learner does not have to present the responses like the learner is comparing the two. They don't have to link. For example, the learner can talk about number of items on piecemeal, and then come and talk about workers with the same experience qualifications are paid on salary scales. So you can see there that they are not linking. They don't have to link, but the difference must be clear. We are not expecting the learner to put them like they are in the memo as it is, as if you are comparing the two. You are not comparing. But the difference must be clear, because the question says to the learners, they must outline the differences between the two salary determination methods. Okay, let's go back to the question paper. Let's look at 3.3 now. Read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Face-to-face, FTF. Before we go to the questions, face-to-face is a law firm looking for a receptionist for their business. They advertise the vacant post on the notice board of the business. That is a scenario. Now, look at the question. Name the method of recruitment applicable to FTF. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. 3 marks. So, this is also has to do with application. They must read and determine whether the method used there is internal or it's external, and they must motivate why. And then 3.3.2, discuss the advantages. It's a follow-on question of the recruitment method identified in question 3.3. Let's go to the memo. The method of recruitment from the scenario is internal. What is the motivation for that? Because they advertise the vacant post on a notice board of the business. It was done internally. It's 3 marks. Look at the note. Award marks for method of recruitment, even if the code is incomplete. So if the learner said internal recruitment, it's 2 marks, even if the code is incomplete. Do not award marks for the motivation if the method of recruitment was incorrectly identified. Now, if the learner with the first their responses said external recruitment and you marked that learner wrong, if the learner now brings the motivation to say they advertise the vacant post on the notice board of the business, you cannot award that mark, because you can see there that the motivation does not link with the method of recruitment. So that note is important. Be careful when you mark that. And then the advantages of the recruitment method identified in question 3.3.1, and we have now agreed that it is internal recruitment. Now, what is the advantages thereof? It is cheaper, quicker to fill the post when you're using this, is 2 marks. Placement is easy, 1 mark, as management knows the employee's skills, personality, experience, or strengths, another mark. It provides opportunities for career path, 1 mark within the business. The employee already has an understanding, 1 mark, of how the business operates. Induction or training, 1 mark, is not always necessary. So you can read through the responses, but it is clear that these are the advantages of using internal recruitment method. And the maximum marks there is 6 marks. Let's go back to the question paper. Now, look at 3.4. Explain the link between salary determination and the basic conditions of Employment Act. To some, this may, seem like a new question altogether. It's just that it's not been asked very often. You'll struggle to locate it in the previous papers. But when you go to your examination guideline, this content is there. This question is also there. The link between salary determination and basic conditions of Employment Act. And I'm sure even in your notes, you have notes to this question. So that should not be a problem for learners to answer this, for as long as they have gone through their notes, and for as long as you have taken them through the topic itself as a teacher in class. But you cannot begin to interpret this as a new question or an unfair question. It's a relevant question. Just go back to your examination guide and you'll find this. Let's go to the responses. The link between salary determination and basic conditions of Employment Act. The responses that I expected, amongst others, are the following. The basic conditions of Employment Act, it sets out condition, 1 mark, that ensure fair labor and human resources practice. According to BCEA, business may use different remuneration methods, 1 mark, to apply to pay their employees, another mark. Payment of salary should be based, 1 mark, on whether the employee is permanent or employed on a fixed contract, another mark. So you can see the link now. When you read the responses, there is clear link between BCEA and the salary determination. Another fact, the businesses are supposed to conduct income tax, pay as you earn, 1 mark, from the employees' taxable salaries. BCEA outlines legalities such as employment contract, which may affect salary determination. So there is a link between salary determination and the basic conditions of Employment Act. So I thought it was important to take note of that question and not begin to think that that question is an unfair kind of a question. I want us to take a break of about 5 minutes, and when we come back, we wrap up question 3, we go to question 5, and then go to section C. With those few words, I want us to take a break. Thank you. All right, welcome back from that short break. And I said we will go straight to wrapping up question 3. Let's look at question 3.5. That scenario, it boils down also to application. And these are type of questions that teachers must begin to use now during their informal assessment, because if learners can apply the knowledge, it becomes easier for them to answer correctly as expected. Shine Bright Lightning, SBL. Shine Bright Lightning sells exclusive kitchen lights to various customers. SBL has been receiving complaints from their customers regarding the poor quality of some of their products. SBL decided to make use of the services of quality circles to stay ahead of their competitors. Now, 3.5.1, identify 2 TQM elements that are applicable to SBA. You see, it's about TQM, but it's application now. It's for them to read and identify. It's just about application. And then motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario. And a guide has been given there in the form of a table. That use the table below as a guide. You've got TQM element and then the motivation. Let's go to the margin guideline and see how this is supposed to have been answered. Okay? The first TQM element there is total client or customer satisfaction is 2 marks. What is the motivation? SBL has been receiving complaints from their customers regarding the poor quality of some of their products, another mark. And then the second TQM element is continuous improvement of processes and systems. The motivation, SBL decided to make use of the services of the quality circles to stay ahead of their competitors. So it's submax 4 for TQM elements and submax 2 for motivation, and the maximum marks for that question is 6. Look at the notes. Number 1, mark the first 2 only. For example, if a learner provides more than 2, you mark the first 2 only, and then the answer does not have to be in a tabular format. Even though they have been provided with a guide, they may choose not to answer in a tabular format, and you can't penalize them. And then award marks for TQM elements, even if the code is incomplete, even if the motivation there is not complete, you still award the 2 marks, and then do not award marks for motivation if the TQM elements were incorrectly identified. If the TQM element is incorrectly identified, you cannot award marks. It's important to take note of that. And then you have question 6. Question 6 was about discuss the benefits of good quality management system. It's a very common kind of a question. The benefits, the advantages. Solve problems related to quality and implement improvements. This is an advantage. It ensures that there is no duplication of activities or tasks in the workplace. It improves the quality of products and services through regular reviews of quality processes. So you can read through the responses, but This is a common kind of a question, but what is even more common is the last question there. The last question was saying, suggest quality indicators in the general management function. Here we're talking about quality within the general management function. And learners don't do well in here, and I don't know why. And it is clear that there is a need to go back and treat quality within business functions. It is important. This is what we're expecting from the learners when it comes to this question. Effective customer services are rendered. And again, coming to 3.6, we are not 3.7, I think 3.7. The verb there that has been used, you must take note of that because it says suggest. And remember, we said with a verb such as that one, it means mark allocation will come at the end of the response. You can see on the memo there that the response comes at the end. To develop or implement or monitor effective strategic plans is 2 marks. Efficient organization or allocation of business resources to provide for the successful achievement of long-term and short-term plans, 2 marks. Structured standards and norms should be in place so that control mechanism can be implemented, another 2 marks. Set direction and establish priorities for their business, 2 marks. Be prepared to set an example of the behavior that is expected from employees in terms of ethics as well as productivity. These are just some of the responses, but they all have got to do with quality within the general management function. And you mark that to a maximum of 6 marks, and then there is the breakdown of marks, and the total for this question is 40. I want us to go straight to question 4, which is miscellaneous, and you know that by miscellaneous now we're meaning that it's a combination of the 2 broad topics, your business environments and your business operation topics. Let's go straight to the question there. Look at question 4.1. I said first questions normally they are like appetizers, simple, easy to answer, straightforward, and they don't carry a lot of marks. Look at 4.1. It says, name 2 types of business sectors. I mean, this is a grade 10 kind of a question. It's 2 marks. Can you believe this? 2 types of business sectors. It's a giveaway. It's an appetizer. And then 4.2, it's important. There comes application again. It's not like a straight kind of a question where learners are simply asked to name the BBBEE pillars. Here, they must identify the pillars that apply to the business in the statements below. Let's look at the statements. 4.2.1, Musa auditors appointed black people in senior executive position. Now you must link that with the correct pillar. 4.2.2, they invited some of their black employees to buy shares in the business. Number 3, Musa auditors registered their employees with learnerships and learning programs. Let's look at the responses. When you look at the responses, 4.2.1, it links with management control. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is ownership. And the third one is socio-economic development or skill development. Straight answers as they are. And then 4.3, explain 2 types of integration strategies. Just explain 2 types. You see, there it comes. You remember when we were talking about that note where the number has been stated and it has got to do with either discuss, describe, or explain. Here it says, explain 2 types of integration strategies. Look, the first response there is forward vertical integration is 2 marks, and the explanation is 1 mark. The business combines business with or take over its distributors. It's a mark. So look at how this should be marked. The strategy is 2 marks. Explanation is 1 mark. Submax is 3. So you link this with the note that we said before. And then backward vertical integration. The business combines business with or take over its suppliers. It's 1 mark. The aim is to increase the business dependency on the supplier. 1 mark. The strategy is 2 marks. Explanation is 1. Submax is 3. And the last type there is horizontal integration, where a business takes control or incorporates other businesses in the same industry which produce or sell the same goods or services. The aim is to reduce the threat of competition, and the strategy is 2 marks, explanation 1 mark, submax is 3. Note, mark the first 2 only. And then, ways in which business can deal with challenges posed by technology. You know, this kind of a question, it looks like it's a new question or different question, but it is there. Recommend ways in which business can deal with challenges posed by technology as a personal analysis factor. Very nice, interesting kind of a question, but being posed differently, because you have this in your notes. It's not an unfair kind of a question. It's a relevant and a slightly different kind of a question. Let's look at the responses. Ways in which business can deal with challenges posed by technology. For example, continuous research on the latest available technology or equipment in the market, 2 marks. Train existing or appoint new employees to maintain or use new equipment. Compare prices or select suitable supplies for new equipment at reasonable prices. Businesses must be geared for online trading or e-commerce, and so on. So when you look at these responses, they are also there in the notes. So it was also a very interesting kind of a question in this paper, but still relevant to what is being asked. Let's go to the next question now. 4.5 aspects that must be included in induction program. It was even there in the June examination. That should not be a problem. 4.6, read the job advertisement below and answer the questions that follow. Now, when you look at scenarios now, scenarios about application, application, application. And this is what you must now begin to tip your learners on. Receptionist, Wayport. We are a successful international logistic company with our head in Pretoria. We have a vacancy in our Wayport office for a receptionist who meets the following requirements: 5-year experience as a receptionist, fully conversant with especially Xhosa and English, record customer complaints, excellent written and verbal communication skills, safekeeping of business documents. Salary package 35,000 per annum plus benefits. Closing date 15 March 2021. Note, all applicants must be screened before they are invited to attend the interview. Here are the questions. Quote 2 examples of job specification from the scenario above. 2 examples of job specification. Now, learners should now be knowing what is job specification. And remember, job specification and job description, they should know the difference between the two. Here now they are applying their knowledge. That's why I'm saying when you look at scenarios, they deal now mostly with application. Examples of job specification from the scenario above, and then explain the meaning of screening as part of the selection procedure. Let's look how this should be marked. Job specification examples: 5 years experience as a receptionist, because you see it has got to do with skills, because that's what the skills that the applicant should be having. 5 years experience as a receptionist, fully conversant with especially Xhosa and English, excellent written and verbal communication skills. You see, those are there in the advert. You mark the first two only. Only award marks for response that are quoted from the scenario, not any other thing. And then the meaning of screening. What is screening? Is to check application documents against the requirements of the job. Candidates who meet the minimum requirements are separated from others, and do background or credit reference checks of applicants who qualify for the job. Prepare a short list of suitable candidates after screening. So this is what screening is all about, and this is what is actually was expected from the responses of the learners. Number 4.7, this is a very kind of popular question also, the difference between quality control and quality assurance. Distinguish between the two. What is quality control? It's inspection of final product to ensure that it meets the required standard. You are controlling quality. On the other side, quality assurance is carried out during and after the production process to ensure that required standards have been met at every stage of the process. That is a very clear distinction or the difference between the two. You can read other responses. The submax is 2 for quality control and submax is 2 for quality assurance. The maximum is 4. Here is the note. The answer does not have to be in a tabular format. The difference does not have to link but must be clear. Award 2 marks if the difference is not clear, or mark either quality control or quality assurance only. So what does that mean? If the difference is not clear, mark only. You know, you can concentrate only on quality control or only on quality assurance, because it is expected that the difference should be clear, even though it does not link. But if it is not clear, you can either award marks only for quality control or only for quality assurance. I hope that is clear. And then the last one, the very kind of a common kind of a question also. It was there also in the June exam. Ways in which TQM can reduce the cost of quality. And learners still do not get marks for this, and I don't know why. Some of the responses. Ways in which TQM can reduce the cost of quality. Introduce quality circles to discuss ways of improving the quality of work or workmanship, 2 marks. Schedule activities to eliminate duplication of tasks. Share responsibility for quality output among management and workers. Train employees at all levels so that everyone understands their role in quality management. Develop work systems. This is what the business should do to reduce the cost of quality. Develop work systems that empower employees to find new ways of improving quality. Work closely with suppliers to improve the quality of raw materials, and so on. I don't have to read all the responses, but it's a common kind of a question. Maximum is 6 there. Learners should have actually done well in this question. And submax, in fact, maximum is 6, and the total for the question is 40. There is the breakdown of question 4, and it brings us to the end of section B, and we will now be moving straight to section C. The last section of this question paper. Let's look at question 5. Question 5. Answer any one question in this section, and by now you know that if learners have answered them both, you mark the first one that the learner has presented. Question 5, based on legislation, and it is based on which specific legislation National Credit Act. The National Credit Act 34 of 2005 was established to protect consumers against reckless credit trading by businesses. The Act outlines several fundamental rights of consumers in the credit market, and businesses should be acting according to a set of rules. That is the preamble. That is that background that you get, and it gives you, as a learner, it gives you a clear sense that, oh, this question is based on this topic. In this instance, the topic is National Credit Act. Now, write an essay on the National Credit Act in which you include the following aspects. There you have the 4 bullets. Remember, I talked about that earlier on. The first bullet, which is actually a question or an instruction. As a learner, you are expected to outline the purpose of National Credit Act. The purpose. Secondly, explain the consumer rights as outlined in the National Credit Act. Thirdly, the impact. Discuss the impact of the National Credit Act on businesses. Lastly, recommend ways in which the business can comply with this act. 40 marks. Let's go to the marking guideline. Question 5. Introduction. There is the introduction. And it is important when you advise your learners on introduction and conclusion to say to them, make sure that your introductory statements, they link with the bullets or they link with the instructions. That will make it relevant for them to come up with the expected introduction. You know, they will not come up only with introduction in general, but the introduction or conclusion would be in line with the questions themselves. So they must read the 4 bullets, and each bullet they must think of coming up with introductory statements and concluding statements for their introduction and conclusion to be relevant. Look at the first bullet there on the introduction in the marking guideline. The National Credit Act is aimed at regulating the credit market. 1 mark. Businesses need to be aware of both positives and negatives impact that the Act has on their operations to stay relevant. Another mark. The Act provides guidelines to credit providers and consumers regarding their rights and responsibilities. Another mark. The Act stipulates ways in which business should comply with to avoid facing penalties. Now, when you read those 4 introductory statements, they link to each and every bullet. The first one, it links with the first one, with the first bullet on the purpose. The second one, it links with it links with the impact. The third one, it links with the second bullet because it has got to do with the rights. The fourth introductory statements, it links with bullet number 3 on the impact. The impact of, in fact, the second bullet, it links with the third bullet in the question paper. I don't want you to get confused. For example, in the question paper, the third bullet says, discuss the impact of National Credit Act on business. Look at the second statement in the marking guideline. It says, businesses need to be aware of both the positives and negatives impact that the Act has on their operations to stay relevant. Can you see that this introductory statement, it links with that bullet? So advise your learners to always come up with statements that link with the bullets. That will make their introductions and conclusions relevant. And then any other relevant introduction related to the purpose of the National Credit Act or the impact or the consumer rights or the ways to comply. 2 marks. The purpose now of the National Credit Act. The purpose is to promote the social and financial interests of consumers is 2 marks. To promote fair but competitive credit market, 2 marks. To ensure that consumers know what is included in their credit contracts, 2 marks. To prevent discrimination and ensure credit is available to all consumers, 2 marks. To make provision of the establishment of the National Credit Regulator, 2 marks. To ensure registration of credit bureau and debt counseling services, 2 marks, and any other relevant related answer related to the purpose of National Credit Act, and the maximum marks there is 8 marks. Now you must be careful here. We are talking about the National Credit Act. You must be careful that your learners do not present responses with regards to Consumer Protection Act, because that is, commonly the mistake that they do. They confuse Consumer Protection Act with the National Credit Act. You must be clear and be careful. The next question there was on the consumer rights. And here again, you're talking about consumer rights as contained in the National Credit Act. And there's also consumer rights according to the Consumer Protection Act. So you must be careful there. Here, the consumer rights, for example, every consumer has the right to the following: to apply for credit, 1 mark, and to be free from discrimination, another mark. Consumers have the right to obtain reasons, 1 mark, for credit being refused, another mark. So you can see that the rights here, they link with the National Credit Act. Consumers have the right to receive pre-agreement documentation, 1 mark, before concluding any credit transaction, another mark. Consumers have a right to fair and responsible, 1 mark, marketing, another mark. They've got a right to surrender or return goods to the credit provider, 1 mark, to settle the outstanding debt, another mark. They've got a right to apply for debt review or counseling, 1 mark, if consumers cannot afford to repay their debts, another mark. They've got a right to receive protection of their personal information. So read through the rights carefully and make sure that you mark accordingly. But you mark to a maximum of 12 under the rights as contained in the National Credit Act. And then we go to the impact now. And remember, with impact, wherever you come across the verb impact, you must always think of positives and negatives. Now let's start with the positives or advantages of National Credit Act. And here we are talking about the impact on businesses. The first response there, the whole credit process is transparent. It's 1 mark. E.g., both businesses and customers know their responsibilities, another mark. Authorized credit providers, 1 mark, may attract more customers, another mark. I'm sure you must have seen when you enter institutions that provide credit, for example, like your banks, there's always a certificate that certifies that this is an authorized credit provider. And the moment you see that certificate, it reassures you that here I'm dealing with an authorized person, I'm dealing with a legal person, and that may attract more customers. It's a positive. It lowers bad debts, resulting in better cash flow. It increases cash sales, as credit can only be granted to qualifying customers. It protects businesses, 1 mark, against non-paying customers, another mark. It stops reckless lending, 1 mark, and prevents businesses from bankruptcy, another mark. You can go through the positives, but be careful. These are the positives or the advantages in as far as National Credit Act is concerned to the business. And then the negatives or disadvantages of this act to the business. Businesses can no longer, 1 mark, carry out credit marketing another mark. It's a disadvantage now to them. It leads to loss of sales 1 mark, as many consumers may no longer qualify to buy on credit. So you can see it's an impact on the business. The paperwork and administrative process required by the Act 1 mark are costly and time-consuming another mark. The business needs to appoint additional staff 1 mark to deal with the extra administration another mark. The business should, in fact, should the credit agreement be declared reckless 1 mark, the business can forfeit the outstanding debt and the goods. So all these have got to do with the negative impact this act has on business. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can read through, but it is important to take note that negatives have got to link with what has been asked, which is the impact on business. And then you go through that to a maximum of 16. And again here, remember it's an impact. Some learners may focus only on the positives or the advantages. Some may also focus only on the negatives, or some may combine the two. You mark accordingly and you award marks as required. But the maximum marks for this is 16 marks. And then we go to the last part of the question, which is ways in which business can comply with the Act. Recommend ways in which business can comply with the Act. Some of the responses that learners may provide should include, amongst others, credit providers must be registered with the National Credit Regulator. This is a way in which a business can comply. It must register with National Credit Regulator. It's 2 marks. Businesses must submit an annual compliance report to the National Credit Regulator. It's 2 marks. If they do that, they would be complying with the Act. They must conduct affordability assessment to ensure the consumers have ability to meet their obligation. 2 marks. If they do that, they are complying. They must conduct credit checks with registered credit bureau and could also consult the National Credit Register, another 2 marks. So you can read through all of this, but you mark to a maximum of 10. That was the last part of the question, and then you come to the conclusion. Conclusion, we are looking for a concluding statement. And remember what I said earlier on. The conclusion should also link with any bullet in the question. That would make the conclusion to be relevant. Let's look at the first concluding statement in the marking guideline. It says, the NCA requires businesses offering goods and services on credit to practice due diligence and responsibility. So you can link this with the first bullet in the question, which is about the purpose. Consumers should be informed of the consequences that could result from them borrowing money. You see the concluding statement is 2 marks also. Look at the third one. Credit providers should regularly assess the impact of the Act to remain sustainable in the credit market. You can link this with the third bullet on the question, which was about the impact. But it is a concluding statement. There are several bodies that credit providers should register with and adhere to several protocols. This you can link it with the last bullet, which has got to do with compliance. So if learners can come up with concluding statement that link with the bullets, that would make them relevant to the question, and they will definitely get that well-deserved 2 marks, which is 2 marks there. And then it brings us to the end of our essay. Maximum is 40 marks. Let's look at the breakdown of the marks. Introduction is 2 marks. Purpose is 8. Consumer rights is 12. Impact is 16. Ways to comply is 10. Conclusion is 2. You now reduce that to a maximum of 32. And then you've got your lasso, which is 8 marks. And then you've got your 40 marks there. Let's now go to the last question in this memo discussion. The last question has got to do with the human resource. The last question, question 6, let me read it. The recruitment procedure provides guidelines on how businesses should identify vacant positions. Shortlisted candidates should be invited to attend an interview, and the successful candidate should sign an employment contract. Businesses should follow the correct placement procedure. You see, that is a preamble. It gives you background and it gives you information on what to expect in the question, and it is clear that this has got to do with human resource. Write an essay on the human resource function in which you include the following aspects. 1. Outline the recruitment procedure as a human resource activity. Explain the purpose of the interview. Discuss the legal requirements of an employment contract. And lastly, advise businesses on the placement procedure as a human resource activity. Let's go to the marking guideline. And here now we are going to the last question. The last question. Which is question 6, human resources. Look at the introduction. The first statement, the business should be well informed about the processes and methods they can follow when recruiting a person for a job. That is an introductory statement. It links with the first bullet in the question. The first bullet was about the recruitment procedure. The second one, the human resource manager should arrange to meet the shortlisted candidates face to face. This one, it links with the second bullet, which is about the purpose of the interview. The employment contract that the HR department draws up must comply with the legal requirements. It links with the third bullet, which is about legal requirements of an employment contract. And then it is important that the business place the right person in the right job. It has to do with placement. So you can see the introductions, the introductory statements, they link with the instructions or with the bullets or with the question itself. And of course, any other relevant introduction related to all of the bullets, and a maximum of 2 marks there. The first bullet, which was about recruitment procedure. Here is the recruitment procedure. The human resource manager should prepare the job description in order to identify recruitment needs, 2 marks. And you see the 2 ticks come at the end. Why? Because the instruction was outline the requirements, in fact, the recruitment procedure as a human resource activity. That's why you have the 2 ticks at the end. Human resource manager should indicate the job specification or description, key performance areas to attract suitable candidates, 2 marks. Should prepare job analysis, which includes specification and description, 2 marks. A decision whether to recruit internally should be made to identify suitable candidates from within the business. If internal recruitment is unsuccessful, external recruitment should be considered. If the internal recruitment is done, the relevant recruitment source should be selected. The advertisement should be prepared with relevant information, the name of the company, for example, the contact details, and so on, and place the advertisement in the appropriate media that will ensure that the best candidates apply. So this is the procedure when you recruit, when you execute recruitment as a human resource activity. Maximum marks, 14, and there's also room to accommodate any other relevant answer related to recruitment procedure, depending on the source that you are using. The purpose of the interview. explain the purpose of the interview, is to obtain information about the strengths and weaknesses of each candidate. It's 2 marks, but remember it's split marking because of the verb explain. It helps, is to help the employer in choosing or making an informed decision, 1 mark, about the most suitable candidate, another mark. It matches the information provided by the applicant, 1 mark, to the job requirements, another mark. Creates an opportunity where information about the business and the applicant, 1 mark, can be exchanged, another mark. You see, it is clear. These facts, they give the purpose of conducting an interview to determine a candidate's suitability for the job or to evaluate the skills and personal characteristics of the applicant. Maximum marks there, 12 marks. Legalities. The question said, discuss the legal requirements of the employment contract. You discuss what will make employment contract to be legal. The first response there, or the first answer, it says employment contract is a written agreement between the employer and the employee. So the fact that it is written, that makes it a legal, some sort of a legal document, because it can stand the test of time in a court of law because it's been written down. So it's a requirement for a contract to be legal. It has got to be in writing. It is a legally binding document, even though certain aspects of the contract are negotiable. It makes it legal because it is legally binding, a legally binding document. It may not contain any requirements or any stipulations that are in conflict with the basic conditions of Employment Act. Remember, the BCEA is an act, and there is no way that a contract, an employment contract, should contravene the BCEA. If that happens now, then it means that will not be legally right. It has got to be in line with the BCEA to be legally acceptable. It should not contravene the basic conditions of Employment Act. So these are some of the responses that we are expecting when it comes to the legal requirements. Parties involved must have contractual capacity. It's another fact. The employer and the employee must both be satisfied with the conditions of the employment contract. Neither the employee nor the employer may unilaterally change aspects of the employment contract. It should include code of conduct or code of ethics for employees. Specific details of the job remuneration package should be clearly explained to employees or stipulated in a contract. The human resource manager must explain the terms and conditions of the employment contract to employees if deemed necessary. It should set out clearly the conditions of employment, duties, responsibilities of the employees. It must stipulate what the employee would receive in terms of benefits in labor legislation. So these are some of the responses that we are expecting from the candidates, but the bottom line is they've got to do with the legal requirements. And you must be careful when you mark this, because most of the time learners tend to confuse this with aspects that should be contained in an employment contract. We are not talking about the details of an employment contract here. We are talking about the requirements that would make a contract of appointment legal. We are talking about legal requirements. And the maximum there is 14. And then we go to the last part of the question, which was about placing. Advise the business on the placement procedure. employer should outline specific responsibilities or expectations of the employee new position. 2 marks. The employer should determine the relationship or similarities between the expectations of the position and the competencies of the employee. 2 marks. Determine the employees. This is what the employer should do. Should determine the employee's strengths, weaknesses, skills, interests by subjecting them to various psychometric tests. This has got to do with making sure that when they place the newly appointed applicant, they place them accordingly and correctly. That's what the procedure is all about, and you mark to a maximum of 6, and other relevant facts can be added there on the memo, but of course if they are from a reliable and an approved kind of a source. I know in your notes you will have other additional responses that should be added to the memo there for you to make it easier for you to mark when you mark this aspect of the question. And then of course the last one is the conclusion. We come to the conclusion. It's a concluding statement. Look at the first concluding statement, which is awarded 2 marks. The recruitment procedure must be done properly in order for the business to achieve its objectives. You see, it links with the first bullet, which was about recruitment. The interview provides an opportunity for the 2 parties to exchange and clarify information. It's a concluding statement. It also links with the second bullet, which was about the interview. So you see here that even with conclusion, the concluding statements should always also link with the question. That would make it easier for learners to come up with relevant concluding statements. And of course, you will award 2 marks also for any other relevant conclusion relating or related to all the 4 bullets as included in the question. And you award 2 marks for that, and it brings us to the end of the question 6, which is totaled 40 marks. Now let's look at the breakdown of this question. Introduction is 2 marks. Recruitment procedure is 14. Purpose of the interview is 12. Legalities is 14. And placement is 6. And then conclusion is 2. When you add all of this, they will give you a total of 50. And then you reduce that to a maximum of 32. And then you add your 8 marks for lasso to arrive at a 40 mark for this question. Now, that brings me to the end of the memo discussion. I hope I've taken you through section A up to section C of the question paper, and also what is it that is expected of you in as far as marking. You as the teacher, marking is concerned of this, and I wish you luck, and I hope you will mark accordingly. And remember, when it comes to marking, it's important that you mark accurately. And after marking, you will then analyze the results. If you have marked accurately, your analysis of results will give a true picture of the performance of your learners. So make sure that you mark accurately as a teacher and you analyze the results. Then you would know how do you stand in as much as performance at the end of the year is concerned. And after analyzing, that should give you a picture as a teacher now, where you stand, where you are, whether now your learners are now ready for the final examination. So this is a very good indicator of where your learners are. And looking at the paper, this was a very fair kind of a paper, and I believe your learners will do well. I wish you well. And as to the learners, I want to also urge you to go back now and prepare for paper 2, which still has to be written in a week's time. So with those few words, I wish you all the best, and we will definitely meet for the a memo discussion of paper 2 when the time is right, after the paper shall have been written. With those few words, I want to thank you and wish you well. Thank you.